Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Crimson Desert talk. Today I want to cover the latest features overview about combat and progression that happened a couple days back with some of the greater stuff that it revealed, and an interview from Luke Stevens with Will Powers with some specific questions with reasonable answers, such as probably a lack of a demo, but we'll see. So yeah, let's get straight into it. The overview itself focuses on combat and progression. We'll be progressing the combat through skills, weapons, and equipment, and all the personal choice in that. Weapon swapping is going to be key though. So in this example we see Sword and Shield Cliff suddenly swapping to a spear to pogo stick from it, resulting in a drop kick that sends the enemy flying. As a weapon skill example, we see with a pitchfork here, which I guess is a spear type, Cliff sort of thrusting in a magical way because multiple thrusts fly at once from his sides. So it seems like each weapon has its own skills. In a different example, we see some info from mounted combat, which from the interview, by the way, sounds like it can be insanely strong via dragons and the mech, which they had to balance a bit. But in this case, the bear can attack itself, mauling targets ahead of it, not just Cliff swinging his own weapon, which can apparently happen at the same time, so I wonder how you control that. But as we've seen in many clips, the mech does seem pretty insane for clearing out basic enemies en masse with its rockets. In regards to weapon options though, we see a little selection of them here, which are used by these three main characters. We actually have it confirmed from the interview that Cliff is the primary protagonist who will be played during key main story moments, but we will be able to play these other characters pretty much whenever outside of that. But we know for certain that they have their own skill systems as shown in the menu. We see these characters are called demeniss, or Damian, and Unka. I'm gonna need someone to say that out loud. From the overview though, we see how smooth weapon swapping is and how it is important to the combat. Cliff again fighting with a sword and shield to then pogo vault with a spear to knock down an enemy for a free follow-up. But say this character that's normally shown as quite agile with lesser weight, suddenly grappling and pile driving this guy from the air, only to swap to a buckler and rapier that they end up casting spells with. Then we have a gun that has enough stopping power per shot to interrupt this guy, but charged up with magic completely finishes him. We also finally get some information about the unarmed combat, which we've seen littered throughout the trailers. Apparently, these unarmed attacks are just possible around whatever weapon you're using. So Cliff here is swinging with a weapon, only to combo that into an elbow jab, then a leg sweep that knocks the enemy down, only to then shoulder bash them flying through some barrels. In lots of gameplay moments, we see a simple full body kick that sends an enemy flying into others, or say using the terrain to bounce them. The grapple system continues to look crazy though, but I do wonder what the limiters on this are. Like, should it matter what our weight is versus theirs? How much can we just interrupt someone? Bigger enemies, can they be grappled? We know you're going to invest in that if you want to though. Another key mechanic of the game then is the element imbuement system that we have seen in bits. Different elements can imbue a weapon with some enhanced attacks, and so certain weaknesses for elements will be relevant. So in this case we see lightning triggering a sort of burst AoE on the contact. They pull up this wheel that defines it though, letting the player swap them in seemingly just a moment. There's wind, fire, earth, ice, and lightning as obvious options, but I want you to explain this flower option to me. What is that? But yeah, we see from sort of a baseline with the combat, weapon swapping, multiple element imbuements, multiple ranges, weaving unarmed attacks alongside the grapple system, and potentially a weight system on top of that. That's the basics, but how will we invest in that and mod that? That's up to us. In regards to mobility though, we do see in lots of the exploration clips, mobility used for traversal and also engaging fights, but we haven't had a good look at it how it's pulled out mid-fight. The earth style magic that's used to sort of bounce upwards can obviously be used to generate height to then slam back down with. But we see the grapple being used to whip them around and slam down, but interestingly sort of bounce off the ground and go back up again. What is this guy made of? A bit more of a humble moment then is Cliff running into a slide, which then triggers a sort of ground grapple from below that brings this guy down with him. They list for avoiding damage options like counters and dodges, but also slides. So the hitboxes must be solid if they actually let you avoid attacks by sliding under them, which to be fair, sounds pretty fun. In regards to perfectly timed guards and dodges, parrying and that kind of thing, you'll expose an enemy by perfectly doing one of these, and then you counter them as they're exposed. Enemy management does look important though, whether it's individual or big enemies. These moments with all the enemies stacked up, like this character's using a large greatsword to thrust into this huge pack of them and sends a lot of them flying at once. So it does seem like you'll be expected to deal with a lot of enemies all in one moment. But yeah, combat progression. As is obvious, this will be an aspect of the game. Many skills and tools we've seen in these clips will be something that you might unlock at some point, but you'll start with a limited set of equipment and skills, then find more and unlock new options. The first thing they highlight again is the Abyss artifact system. There's artifacts that will be falling from the sky above, and you'll find them through basic exploration, but also through combat and quests. Special artifacts will be found through tough trials, or maybe even currently in the hands of a more powerful enemy that you've got to take, not to mention going up to the Abyss and finding more. We get this glimpse of the skill system where we have this own section for each character, so right now we're looking at Cliff's, but you can see one for the others, and in this moment he's sort of upgrading the stamina. So spending one Abyss artifact as a sort of currency that you'll collect en masse to make evades and other actions cost less energy. We'll use these to increase raw stats like health and stamina, but yes, also unlock new skills, as well as importantly improve the skills we already have. They highlighted that one sub-skill system is the grapple system, so if you want to really control fights through that, investing in that is an option. But another unlock system that seems cool is this observation mechanic. Some skills will be unlocked as you observe them in the world. So in the Abyss, this obvious example of using Abyss magic to progress some sort of traversal or puzzle section, sure. But in this moment, we have a special enemy that jumps up into the air and body slams, and the game slows down, highlights that enemy, and then we see Cliff replicating it. So that must be a way we find new skills, which is pretty interesting. Another little detail, by the way, is this character using a sort of technology to glide. Instead of, say, Cliff with his crazy magical cloak, I guess she just doesn't have that, and this is her way of doing that, separating them a bit. The other end of progression is, of course, equipment progression. We get this little look at a town map, and here we have a few different icons, but they're obviously highlighting the smithy. Apparently we can create new gear or repair yours, so maybe there's a durability system, but at a small glance we see basic stats, damage amounts, attack speed, crit chance and other passives on the weapon, which when upgraded will raise these stats. We find the materials for upgrading through different options, like purchasing the basics, exploration and gathering it, whether that's mining or hunting, as well as defeating enemies that have the resource, and quest rewards and secret areas. They also showed us equipment modding though, using this witch system, so it seems like you'll find witches in each region. And with these we socket in these Abyss gears, maybe adding raw damage, attack speed, or crit chance, but hopefully some other more interesting effects too. In regards to the bosses, they do highlight that in this video briefly. It's just funny because in the interview, they talk about how bosses are obviously an important part of the game, but they're not like a main selling point, just one feature amongst many. But we do see some pretty cool settings for them. So we got this classic ruins with a giant fluffy spider, sure, but look at this. Cliff is flying super high up in the air, and then he's following along this sort of fleet of mechanical creatures with lights across the wings, maybe a power system. They've got propellers in their heads. This design's insane. He catches up and then grapples to the back of a smaller one, so you're gonna have to find these and do some pretty interesting interactions just to take them on. They list a bunch of different kinds though. Your classic human bosses, beast bosses, but also what they call the steel bosses and sorcery bosses. So human boss is probably like a strong knight. A beast boss could be like a big wolf. The steel bosses are probably the more mechanical monsters, and sorcery is your more magical, maybe the abyss related ones. They state that they all have their own special rewards though, which could be special abilities that the boss uses against you. You get to unlock that and use it yourself. So we have seen a clear example of that, taking down a boss, grabbing its shield and weapon, and then that weapon when used sometimes summons a spectral version of that boss. But it does sound like there will be some unique bonuses and passives from these as well. So yeah, plenty to look at and see from that. But now let's talk about the interview with Will Powers. Naturally, I'm not going to overly draw from what was a hour-long interview. If you are interested, check that out on Luke Stevens' channel. Instead, let me just reference a few of the bigger or more relevant things that came up. Cliff is the main character that you will use for main story quests. He's the primary protagonist, but they do say you can do pretty much everything else with the other characters. There's references to the fact that they have their own gear, their own talents, and it does seem like they have their own fighting styles. In regards to the mounts though, and them being ridiculously strong in some cases, they do say that some key mount mechanics will be disabled during certain story and boss moments. So if you were to ride the back of a dragon, it would just crush a story encounter, or piloting the mech for example, they won't have that in certain places. But in other cases, in the open world and random boss encounters, you can abuse that. In regards to when the game opens up, as they've said before, the game is like roughly twice the size of the Skyrim map, and we know that there are sort of 5 major regions on the continent. Apparently the world is just going to be completely open the moment you start. No progression is going to be required to open the regions, though certain small areas you might access via side quests, but there is open world scaling. So there will be a level system to the enemies versus you, and the equipment you have versus theirs. So while you can go most anywhere instantly, of course there will be extreme challenges if you go somewhere very quickly and very early, like many open world RPGs. But apparently resources will be tied to certain regions, so it sounds like a logical path might be one region to another if you want to go more typical route. In regards to performance, there is a couple interesting topics there, like particle effects. Many games, the magic, the VFX in general, can be a bit visually distracting or too much, especially if there's a lot of enemies on the screen. But what comes up with that is performance. So they talk about how they added a slider from 0 to 100 that lets you decide how tense these particle effects will be, which means you can massively reduce them, maybe completely turn them off, which should also help performance, which is a good thing. That was in regards to the PC version, by the way. It's possible the console version can't do that or might have different options. We'll see. But they did go on to talk about stuff like upscaling, like DLSS, talking about how that's an option but shouldn't be required. Powers seemed very confident in the game's optimization, and that's obviously an important aspect. But I do hope they deliver on that. People are very skeptical about this topic because it does seem like the game is almost too good to be true visually. Obviously it's tiresome that games release so often in janky states these days to be then fixed over time instead of, ready for release. Hopefully this game isn't another one of those. In regards to testing the game before it releases though, it doesn't sound like it's likely. When asked if there's plans for a demo, the answer initially was, we'll see. Powers was clear that it wasn't like a certain no, but in regards to promotional purposes, they have to be careful. They do want to get the game in people's hands to see certain things and ease concerns, in regards to overhype and how the game looks too good to be true. But he did say that it's hard to demo this game. Like a 1 hour slice doesn't represent what the game's going for. In certain sections, they've had people go against bosses, which is not what the game is all about. They've had people do a siege, which is an aspect of the game, but not what the game's all about. But they do hear, the request for demo, and it is something they've discussed and seem to be contemplating. To me, it doesn't sound likely from his answer, but it's almost like they want to do that, but they want to do it in the right way. But, we're in February right now. The game comes out March. We're running out of time on that. Now in the previous features overview, there was this small section on the grey mains and how they're being built back up. You could make alliances, liberate locations, get involved with other factions. As a result, you might get access to important materials like wood and stone types, which would then help you build up your grey main camp. This was elaborated on a bit in that, you will have this camp and you will build it up, and there will be useful facilities there, as well as recruiting new members to build the grey mains back up. So maybe it will serve actually as a hub for us, one that becomes more useful as you develop it. When asked if there will be a hub, Powers outright said yes, but he was careful how he worded it. That's when this camp came up, stating terms like housing and a lot you can do with that. That a core part of the story is your own faction rebuilding the camp, which can function as a central hub if you want it to. But he was saying it's an option, you can, but it's not expected or needed. You're not going to be forced back there, which is pretty cool. But yeah, there's a lot that's discussed in that interview. Please go check it out if you want more from that. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this breakdown of what's been talked about Crimson Desert this week. We'll be back to cover more as they put out more. So if you enjoyed it, drop a like and I'll be back for the next one. Until then, I've been Hollow, you've been you, and thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.